Hello, everyone, and welcome to the sixth episode and fifth project of the Wolfram Student Podcast. I'm Sam,
And I'm Rashang.
and we're your hosts.
This is the Wolfram Student Podcast, where every fortnight we dive into a new innovative project done by high schoolers using the Wolfram language.
For our sixth episode and fifth project, let's welcome Sohum Bajaj, who will be discussing his project on computationally generating music based on lyrics. Hello, Sohum.
Hello, thank you for having me.
Hello. So, could you tell us a bit more about yourself?
Sure, so I am currently a senior in high school. I go to school in New Delhi, India, and I attended the Wolfram Summer Camp this year in 2022 in July. And a few of my hobbies are playing the guitar, I swim, and of course, linguistics, which was what my project was based on.
Sounds pretty interesting. Well, you did say you went to camp, but do you want to go a little further into what sort of Wolfram experience you have?
Sure, so prior to camp, I was introduced to the Wolfram Summer Camp by my high school counselor who knew it was like a really rigorous and like computational summer camp, and he said, "Oh, you might like this." So I learned about Wolfram, and I started coding in the language, and I just kind of fell in love with the language, and I applied the program with like little prior experience, just enough to get through the problem set that we were given before the summer camp, and then I kind of after I was accepted in summer camp, I kind of expanded my knowledge of the Wolfram language, which led me to pursue my interest in linguistics with at camp. Yeah.
Yeah, Wolfram has this way of making everyone who uses it tend to fall in love with the language. So you're not alone there. Um,
Yeah.
and then just wrapping it all up, what's your favorite Wolfram function?
Ooh, I think I'd have to go with cellular automaton. It's so fascinating the way it's kind of simple when you think about the rules, but then it just evolves into such a creative and um, like useful piece that I've seen in camp. People use it to model traffic and just so many biological organisms you can model evolution. And in my case, I generated music. It's just the applications are so vast. I'd probably have to go with cellular automaton.
That one's actually a really popular one. I think
Yeah.
of our five projects so far, two to three people have said it's their favorite function, including you. Um, but interesting. Okay, great. So now let's get into your project. Can you give us like a quick summary to start us off?
Sure. So my project was computationally generating music given lyrics. And for that, I kind of analyzed precisely mainly the sentiment to generate music, but also various aspects of the lyrics. For example, their phonetic construction. And through that, I created a rhyme finder, their syllabic construction. And after that, I kind of went on to analyze sentiment of the lyrics, which was the main part of my project. And I created a function to then use like a I analyzed sentiment, generated an integer or a decimal output, and from that I used that output to generate music using cellular automaton.
Okay, this seems really interesting. Let's get right into it if you want to start us off.
Sure. So at first I created the compute rhyme finder function. So I was introduced to the word cloud function because we were broken into groups at camp. And one of the prominent linguistics function is a word cloud, and it's pretty basic. You just create a word cloud, and the words vary based on the size, or vary based on size, based on the occurrence of the words and how frequently occurred the words are. So what I found out that Wolfram had a function called the International Phonetic Alphabet, where it could convert normal words into their phonetic alphabet constructions, and it's just converting English to like Latin and Greek. But what was really interesting about the phonetic alphabets was that in Latin and Greek, it's so phonetic that the words, if you the words are kind of formed in a way that you can. It's only based on phonetic and not really because English in the word though, you wouldn't really understand. There's a G and H, but in Greek and Latin, you don't have the G and H. You have mainly just the phonetic sound of the word. So I thought that would be really interesting to create a word cloud of all the phonetic sounds of the words in the lyrics, so that could help musicians to um, kind of understand what rhyme schemes they could produce with the word and exactly what sounds and what consonant sounds they could rhyme with. So this is a word cloud generated in the song "Never Gonna Give You Up." It was kind of a meme at camp, but that's kind of what he used to generate a word cloud. And here you can see the word "you" is repeated. Never gonna give you up. Never gonna let you down. Never gonna run around. So the word "you" is probably the most prominent part of this, and also the ever, like never gonna give you up, never gonna let you down. So you can see never gonna and you being like the largest words here. But then after the accent, you can see the E, V, and the three, which are essentially the phonetic sounds of the words. So the U, the ever part, and the una part are are possible rhymes in the song. And you can
I
see
like
that in the song that yeah, they actually use rhyme schemes. The next function I created was the notes recommender function. And for this, I kind of did a lot of research and to understand how syllables are kind of converted into notes, because I knew that Wolfram had a function to analyze the syllables in a word. And what I did was I came across in pop songs that there's syllabic strong songs. They're probably the most catchy songs, and um, a lot of pop artists maybe even like um, unconsciously follow this pattern, but they assign one note to each syllable. So by analyzing the lyrics, I kind of counted the notes by just mapping through the lyrics and then splitting the string. And I analyzed the syllabic number of the lyrics per line. And then after that, I just outputted that. So you could in the song "Never Gonna Give You Up" in the chorus, the it would be essential or probably catchy to assign seven notes to the chorus. So that's essentially what I did.
Oh, cool. Yeah, that's actually very interesting. So it's like, never gonna give you up. So that's seven,
Yeah,
then yeah. Oh, cool,
yeah.
cool.
Okay. So this is mainly the crux of my project. It was analyzing emotion in lyrics, and this is something I kind of had to work around the Wolfram language with, and it was really helpful to understand kind of the basics of how sentiment analysis works in the Wolfram language. It's kind of what kind of differentiates the Wolfram language to other languages is that in Wolfram you can analyze sentiment with just one phrase. There's already a function to analyze sentiment. You have to work on that part more in the application bit. And for this case, as a musician myself, I thought to myself, what essentially do I do I use the most out of the lyrics when I convert it to music? And it was mainly the syllables and the mood, because you cannot have a Jungle Book theme song in the Titanic. You have to analyze the lyrics and exactly what mood the lyrics create, right? So what I did with this function was this is just a list of lyrics inputted, and then in the sentiment score function, I analyzed the sentiment of each phrase separated by a comma. So I don't like you was negative. I am happy was positive. I am better than Mozart. That was positive. And then I play the piano. That's a neutral phrase. I hate music, a negative phrase. So based on that, it outputted a decimal value. And how I did that was the Wolfram function, it outputs positive, neutral, or negative. That's the output of the sentiment scores of the sentiment function. And what I did was I first deleted the stop words, which weren't really adding to the mood of the song, and then I analyzed each each phrase, and I assigned the number one to a positive output, the negative one to a negative output, and zero to a neutral. And then I took the geometric mean of the elements after adding them up to find really what was the average mood created by the songs. So in this case, as I explained it here, the list has three positive and two negative statements. So the sum was three minus two because the two negative becomes negative two. And the sentiment score is then divided by the number of elements, which is five. So one over five, which is 0.2. So this is more like a neutral song because a neutral output would be zero, really, really positive output would be one, and really, really negative output would be negative one. Of course, lyrics don't really have a one or negative one. It's usually in the middle, but you can kind of see what it's leaning to. So this is like the basis of what I kind of used to generate music. This decimal value that was outputted.
Interesting. So your That's a pretty, complex function. I see there's a lot going on. So you're basically taking that sentence and then deleting the stop words. So kind of just focusing on the main emotion and sort of indicators, basically. And then you're asking it to classify that sentiment.
Yeah.
So uh, what's the toString doing there? The classify function, is it like one, it's 0, -1? That's the output it gives you?
That is the output it gives you. But the toString here, so when I classified the sentiment, I had to break it down into their individual words, and then at the end, after deleting the stop words, I wanted to make the whole thing a string again. So I added the toString function after classifying it, and then I kind of mapped through this whole process over and over to generate an output. It was a lot of trial and error because at first when I just put the classify without the toString, it wasn't working efficiently, and I understood that I broke it down into their individual words, but then I had to string it back again, and then of course
Right.
I mapped through this whole process like 3 times, and to finally generate this output.
Okay. And I guess adding on, if you had like Brick Astley is never gonna give you up and you put like just the chorus, like the words never or like give up, I guess like in that sense, tend to be kind of prominent. So like despite the fact that the lyrics have a positive tone, do you
Yeah.
think that the classify function would end up giving it a negative value?
Oh yeah, of course. I would assume it does, but the whole point and the function, this compute senti score, was to kind of average the whole song. And if you look at the song Never Gonna Give You Up, the lyrics, the chorus might be perceived by a computer as negative, but if you look at the whole song, it's a really positive song. And that's why I kind of averaged it out. So one sentiment, one negative in the whole positive list would not make a difference. And that's why I took the geometric mean of the sentiments, and that's where the compute senti score function really helped. Because like one negative should not really determine the mood of the song.
Okay, seems pretty fair. Thank you.
Okay, so then I created the sound manipulation function, and this is more like an exploration piece for me to understand audio synthesis and stuff like that better. So what I did was through the data that I inputted, I generated a sound by mapping the speech synthesis function into a flattened list of syllables. So it creates different audio recordings for each syllable to help visualize its frequency. So what I do here is, "Hello there, Perry the platypus" is my favorite like phrase. So each a recording is a syllable. So this is just hell, and the second one's low, third one's there, fourth one's pair, fifth one's re, and you know how that goes. So essentially, each syllable is then mapped into an audio recording, and then I visualize this using a spectrogram and a periodogram. And this is more, like I said, like an exploration piece. But then I use this for the frequency recommender function later. So by mapping this, I looked at the periodogram, and there were measures of the energy there were measures of the energy spectrum. It's just me learning about how sound frequency works. And what I understood was that the pitch recognize function had to be used and then graphed into a list line plot. So what I did was I used the pitch recognize function, which my mentor kind of introduced me to map through all these frequencies that I visualized above, and and then here you can see a list line plot of the pitch recognize function. So I could have also just done the graph list line plot of this function, but then I wanted to show that I first put the pitch recognize function and then list line plotted on that function. So here you can see a list line plot of the pitch recognize function, how it recognizes the pitch of each syllable that I first broadcast audio recording, and you can see that there are a lot of missing values here, and that was kind of like a hindrance in my exploration. But then what I then came across this function that I could just delete the missing values, and a lot of them had more missing values than other. So I first normalized the data set by deleting the missing values, and then I I looked at the data, and like I noticed that it seemed to assume a sinusoidal shape, and which was kind of what I expected from what I learned from physics. Like sound mimics a sinusoidal shape. So then I try to find the frequency at which, like the max frequency. Okay, like in this case, I said that I wanted to find the frequency at which the derivative is zero. But by that, I just meant the max frequency, not the minimum frequency. So then for that, I created a function called find max frequency, and what it does was it just created a list of all these values after deleting the missing values and of the frequencies, and then it presented it in an array, and then from that array, it just found the max value of each syllable, which was then visualized into the graph. And what I was aiming to do through this was to find how the pitch of each syllable varies across from the voice inputted. So what I did was this is more like a function to help musicians understand their lyrics and how it would be outputted or sung in a song, and what would be like the average frequency that they have to sing at to kind of in a way sing the syllables perfectly, if that makes sense. So what I did was I deleted the missing values. I created this graph of all the max frequencies. Okay, and that was that was the that was the threshold that a singer would have to achieve to be able to sing a song. And in this case, I used a man's voice because it was similar to my voice. But anyone the Wolfram language has a function to change the voices into a more feminine voice or any other voice. So what I did was the frequency recommender function, which was then used on the data that I just gathered from my exploration. It was to find the average note of the song, and this doesn't make like a lot of sense if you think about how singers go and vary each note into different keys. But what I aimed for this to do was to kind of understand the average frequency or the average pitch that the singer would might have to sing at. Although there might be highs and lows in the song, the average frequency that the singer would have to sing at through through an arithmetic mean of all the syllables around which the frequency was centered. So in this case, the average pitch or the average frequency was 102 hertz. And this was actually, when I researched, it was within the human speech frequency. So I wasn't just messing with data, it was fairly accurate. And so the pitch or the frequency recommender function just the only limitation of this function was that I had to kind of delete the missing values to kind of to come across the solution. And if I had like a further exploration, I would kind of try to regress or predict the values that I missed. So yeah. So this was probably the hardest part of the project. It was to artificially generate music using my compute score function as input. So what the compute score function was did again to recap was it outputted a decimal value based on the average sentiment across the lyrics. And what I learned as a musician was that the mood and the tone of the song varies based on the sentiment of the song. And this function, to first explore this function, I kind of plotted. I wanted my primary aim was kind of to mimic Wolfram tones, which is something Stephen Wolfram created in his exploration, and it was essentially it creates random sounds using cellular automaton, and I couldn't essentially do that in a period of 2 weeks. But diving into the basics of Wolfram tones, I understood that it used cellular automaton to generate music, and so then I researched about cellular automaton, what exactly it was, and it's just a series of rules that create such a beautiful like illustration. And here I illustrated rules of the cellular automaton, and I kind of chose these rules specifically by a process, one by research and two by just trial and error. So there are essentially a few special rules in cellular automaton that create a really like pattern shape and a patterned sequence across, and you can kind of see that through the cellular automatons that they're all triangles, and they all have like patterns, and especially this one and these two, you can see the patterns are so obvious. But in the ones above, also you can, if you dive deeper into each cell, it kind of repeats itself throughout the course of the cellular automaton. And I chose these specific rules to generate music in a more artificial and a patterned way. So the reason I use cellular automaton was because there are a million possibilities if you choose one random pattern from cellular automaton. And that was mainly because I wanted to generate music that would not be generated again if I press the button again. So that's what cellular automaton helped me in. I used the randomness and patterns to generate music. So then going on to my functions, I created the cellular automaton using the compute sentiment score as input. So I used the cellular automaton in the way Wolfram Tone does. I kind of mimic the way Wolfram Tone does it, and like kind of explored myself in finding a pattern that would artificially generate music for a partial portion of the function. So what it does was it takes the input of its compute sensitivity score as the function, the decimal value, and based on that, if it's a neutral tone, and by neutral I meant between negative zero point 0.5 to zero point 0.5, it used the neutral generator. So if the lyrics were neutral, um, the cellular automaton seemed to be a good model of generating neutral music, and it had a combination of both positive and negative musical style elements. So when I used cellular automaton, I understood that there was kind of there weren't two extremes, but there was some positive tones, some negative tones, but it wasn't too negative or too positive, and that's what I kind of wanted out of the neutral generator. So this neutral generator essentially generates music by using cellular automaton, and then of course like a lot of random choices in to to artificially generate music. So if you call the function twice, you will never hear. There's like a 1 in a million possibility that you hear the same song twice. So then what I wanted to do was the cellular automaton. Okay, it could be used to generate neutral sounds. It wasn't specifically, or I couldn't make it used to generate really positive or really negative sounds because the whole purpose of it was so random, and I wouldn't possibly hinder its randomness to just generate a positive sound that I would just create once. I wanted it to be random. I wanted to generate music artificially, and that's why I use resource functions for this. So to artificially generate like negative and positive sequences, I made two functions, the negative generator and the positive generator, and it used a resource function called musical scale sample to choose from a list of either minor or major scales from compute senti score, um, like as it returned a value. So over zero point 0.5 and below negative zero point 0.5. So 0.5, 1, 0.5 to 1, negative 1, negative zero point 0.5 to negative 1. And that's where these functions came in. So again, here it was more like a lot of mix between my theory as a musician and computation. I understood that it's kind of basic, but positive music are major scales, right? And if you look at every positive song, you can most positive songs use major scales. Yes, there are a lot of intricacies in between the major scales, but they're mostly major scales. Negative songs they're mostly minor scales, and that's what I kind of use my musical theory to compute these functions. So at first, I wanted to use the cello, sorry. Um, it was a prominent instrument of the negative. It's a prominent instrument like in negative songs, and I wanted to visualize this. Again, this was part of my exploration. So I used Mathematica's example data to visualize this and to kind of see how the amplitude varies across time, and to this kind of help my understanding of how the notes should be separated. This might seem just like a visualization, but there's a lot of like this other automaton. I kind of noticed that there's a common pattern that it follows. That like it increases in amplitude and then slowly decreases, like a sinusoidal function, right? And it's just mirrored across the x-axis. So what I did was I created the two functions, and in the negative sounds, I chose from a random sample scale of minor functions. It's part of the research functions again in Mathematica. It was amazing just to like take it from there. But I chose from a randomness from random, like even absolute scales like the Hungarian minor or the Napoleon minor. I've never even heard of these scales before, but they're minor scales, and when I played them, they were effective in kind of creating negative sounds. So for the negative sounds, I chose commonly known negative instruments, which is like the cello, the flute, the violin. And these are commonly there are of course various exceptions of these, but these are what I used to generate negative sounds because it worked best, and musical theory suggested that these instruments were mainly used in negative songs. And then for the positive, I kind of the same thing with major scales, Hungarian major, Napoleon major, harmonic major, stuff like that. And I then used the bass, the jazz guitar, and the electric piano, which are positively like you can hear them in a lot of EDM songs, upbeat songs, the bass as well. So that's what I did to generate the negative and the positive songs. And then the final block of the code, my code was to use sentiment scores input, and based on that, it chose what function to call. So this is where I say, like, between zero point 0.5 to negative zero point 0.5, it chose the neutral generator. Between zero point 0.5 to 1, it chose the positive, and between negative zero point 0.5 to negative 1, it chose the negative generator. So that was the purpose of this random audio generator. It uses compute sentiment scores input to choose what function to call it.
Okay, yeah, that's a really cool project. Thank you for sharing.
Thank you.
Yeah, that's really cool. Well, honestly, it's been really amazing listening to your project so far, and I think there's a lot to unpack. We'll also put the link to the notebook in the description if anyone wants to check out the project in its entirety. And yeah, so do you want to elaborate a bit on your future steps, your future goals with this, if there's any direction you want to take this in, or even if you don't want to work on it anymore and you're excited to do other things with Wolfram, perhaps?
Yeah, sure. So I'll elaborate a little bit about the future steps that I had for this project. I kind of did a little bit, but psychological research is what I wanted to do to kind of analyze how accurate the sentiment or motion function was, and also to use polynomial regression in because I had to delete missing values in my recommend frequency function. But for that, I aim to maybe use polynomial regression to kind of to predict what the values would have been if they existed, right? And to predict the frequency of the values based on the data that you have. And that's what polynomial regression kind of does. So that's one of the future steps that I want to take. But with the Wolfram language as a whole, I plan to kind of mimic Wolfram Alpha, which is kind of my my initial project idea. Um, it was that and this, and I wanted to mimic Wolfram Alpha for word problems. That's my end goal of the Wolfram language.
Great. Yeah, no, that's really exciting. And, with all the skills you've gained through this project, which I honestly, I think those are a lot just because of how much stuff was involved. I think you're going to be well positioned to do whatever you want to do with Wolfram in the future, and even with other coding languages for that matter. So,
Thank you.
yeah,
Yeah, your project's been really interesting. I guess just wrapping it all up, uh, with everything you've done so far with the Wolfram language, what sort of like sticks out to you about it? And how do you like plan to use it in the future, like projects beyond continuing this one?
Yeah. So what really stuck out to me about the Wolfram language was contrastingly to other languages that I've learned Java, Python, a lot of languages. This is this language kind of the process from ideation to actually making the project. It was so seamless. For example, like functions like sentiment score, which would probably take a lot of lines of code on a different language. It was just a matter of one word, classify sentiment, two words, sorry. But it was just the process from ideation to application. It was so seamless using the Wolfram language, and I could kind of expand more on my application bit rather than just figuring out how to do something, because process becomes really easy with the Wolfram language. So it kind of fosters a lot of idea and creativity that you can see with the other Wolfram projects as well. And my future goal with the language is to finally create, yeah, like I said, the Wolfram Alpha for word problems. And I talked to Stephen Wolfram about this as well, and he said it would be a project that you might want to undertake later because it would be really time consuming. Something Wolfram Alpha themselves are working on, but of course, a much more basic version of Wolfram Alpha. Essentially, just using the skills that I've used from natural language processing, linguistics as a field as I'm studying it right now to kind of analyze the problems, like mathematical problems, and solve them. So yeah,
great. No, those are great plans. And I wish you best of luck in your future tasks. Thank you so much for joining us here. And yeah, have a great day.
thank you.
Yeah,
You too.
I'm really excited to see where you get with your word problem version of Wolfram
Yeah.
Alpha. It'll be a great help.
Okay, thank you guys.
Mhm. Thank you.
Mm. Thanks for listening to this episode of the Wolfram Student Podcast. We hope you learned something new and take away insights from today's discussion. If you want to be featured in a future episode, fill out the form at tinyurl.com/WSP-interest-form.
And be sure to tune in 2 weeks' time when we discuss with our next podcaster about their project. Once again, thanks for listening.